Hi folks, as far as the football season goes here in England, or certainly the domestic season, that has now drawn to a close. In fact, for myself as a photographer for a professional club in League Two, easy for me to say, that actually drew to a close probably about a month or so ago with the end of the regular season. So I thought I'd do a quick wrap-up video and just kind of show you what my experience has been like over the last few years shooting the final few weeks of the season, and I'll cover what happened in the final few weeks of this season. Obviously, it's a key time of the year for promotions, championships, relegations, and a load of other little news stories that might be worth shooting as you get to the end of a season. As regular viewers of my channel will know, I'm club photographer for Tranmere Rovers, a club in EFL League Two, and I've been doing that role now for something like 8 or 9 seasons. Now, in all but one of those seasons, when we get towards the end, there has been either 2 relegations I've photographed, 3 playoff finals, another playoff campaign that was unsuccessful, and a season ended by COVID in March or whenever that was. This season was all a little bit different because there was actually nothing to play for Tranmere going into the final few games of the season. In fact, probably, if we're honest, the final month or 2 of the season. That doesn't mean, however, as club photographer, there wasn't a lot to photograph. I often will file images with an agency, and so I'm always looking for the other storylines that generally happen around this stage of the season. So there is always still a lot to shoot, and I'm going to start by discussing relegation. At this stage of the season, or the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks, the relegation battles at the end of each division, or the bottom of each division, they really ramp up. The tension becomes more, and ultimately when you get to the final 4 or 5 games of the season, in some of the divisions you will start to see teams have relegations confirmed. As far as me shooting was concerned, about 4 games out from the end of the season, Tranmere had a rearranged game away to Rochdale, and Rochdale had been rock bottom of League Two for some time, and if they lost this game against Tranmere, their relegation would be confirmed. Therefore, I notified an agency I sometimes shoot for that I'd be at this game, and agreed to file some images should they get relegated, because those images of fans looking sad and emotional and crying, players looking dejected, and also some anger that is usually directed to either players or owners or something, they actually make for great shots, and it's always newsworthy as well, especially when, as would have happened in this case, you've got a club that's been in the Football League for a long time that will be dropping out of that structure into a different league setup. When you shoot at Rochdale, the ground is called Spotland or the Crown Oil Arena or something like that these days. One thing to note is the floodlights are not great. In fact, they're pretty lousy, even on what was a nice spring evening. That makes it even more difficult when you've got a camera body like mine that is aging and is very well worn and probably coming to the end of its life. It shoots great in broad daylight, lovely sharp images, but when we get into poor light conditions, it really does start to struggle. And so that was something I had to work with in this game as well. Now, as I said, Tranmere had nothing to play for. Rochdale had to win to keep their, or not lose, to keep their hopes of staying up alive up until their next game. And so as it happened, Tranmere actually went into an early lead in this game. They went 1-0 up thanks to a bizarre own goal. I think it was in about the first 10 minutes when a defender, totally unchallenged on the edge of his own penalty area, probably 20, 25 yards out actually, side-footed the ball back to his goalkeeper. However, it's taken a flick off a bobble in the turf, gone over the foot of the Rochdale goalkeeper and diverted slightly and somehow rolled inside the post to give Tranmere the lead without even having to really earn it. Now, because we were a couple of minutes in, I was making sure I was getting those first action shots off to the club at this point, and because nothing was happening, really there was a no danger situation, I didn't get a shot of the goal, and made me feel a little bit better that no other photographers at the game got that shot either. The celebrations as well, you're not getting any good celebrations in that scenario because even if the goal would have been scored by a Tranmere player, it's going to be slightly muted celebrations just because there's nothing riding on the game for them really. And in this scenario, when it was an own goal, the players looked a little bit embarrassed and didn't really know how to celebrate it. But here's a shot on screen anyway. So that perhaps wasn't an ideal start from a Tranmere perspective. I was focused on trying to get some of the loan players in photographs from some of the young kids who are starting to make appearances at this stage of the season, because those photos are always ones the players themselves will want. So that was primarily what I was doing in a game that lacked any real action. Tranmere were dominating the game, though, mostly without really creating that many opportunities until I think midway in the second half, maybe a bit later, when they were awarded a really fortuitous penalty. It was very harsh on Rochdale. You can see some shots of it here. And they scored the penalty and went 2-0 up in the game, and it looked at this point like it was curtains for Rochdale as far as relegation was concerned. Now, on a celebration for this goal, you'll see the player runs past me or kind of towards me. And so I'd position myself, as I do at all away games. The Tranmere is shooting, the team I'm covering, so I sit the end there shooting, and then if the fans are off to a certain side, the away fans, I will try and pick that side behind that goal to shoot from. That just gives you a slightly better chance, increased probability of the celebrating players running towards you or past you if they score a goal, as happened here. You'll see there's still not a massive amount of passion in these images. So as I say, at 2-0, you're thinking that is probably game over for Rochdale. And I, at this point, started to set up captions and get ready to shoot some of those sad full-time photos of tears and anger and dejection and all the rest of it that would have been newsworthy and may have had a good chance of being sold. You can probably tell by my tone of voice and where I'm going with this that wasn't actually what ended up happening. Rochdale, with a few minutes of normal time left, got themselves back in it with a great goal, a real worldie of a strike. And then somehow in about the 4th or 5th minute of stoppage time, one of their players, I think it was the captain or the centre-back, had been getting quite a lot of stick from the home fans. He must have had a really bad season and, I know, somehow to blame possibly for the relegation in their eyes. And he was getting a bit of stick, and he actually went and scored a late dramatic equaliser. And what that did is it actually meant that they weren't relegated that night at all, and that those shots I was hoping to get, I didn't get. And so Tranmere trundled on into the last 3 games of the season. Rochdale lived to fight another day, and I didn't really get any photos that I was that happy with from the game. It was all a bit of a non-event in the end. As it happened, as is typical, Rochdale were actually relegated in their next game a few days later. And I wish them the best of luck down at National League level, having shot Tranmere at that level for 3 years. It is incredibly tough, and for a photographer, it opens your eyes to a whole load of different challenges and scenarios, and so that is all for Rochdale to come next season. I have shot my own team, as I said, getting relegated twice before. It is not fun, and that was consecutive seasons. The first 2 seasons I photographed them, they got relegated. I was probably a bit of a bad luck omen at that point. And when I say about players looking dejected, we had a couple of homegrown players, local lads who were in the team. And again, while I hated doing it, because I, as a Tranmere fan as well as a photographer, was devastated they'd been relegated, I've got to carry on shooting, and you've got to carry on getting those photos. And so one photo in particular of one of the young lads with tears streaming down his cheeks and stuff was a photo I remember quite well from that game, but also because it was quite a prominent photo at the time. I ended up selling that to be on the front of a book cover about that season and the seasons that followed as well. So shooting those photos that you might not want to shoot if it's your team, and if you're neutral, you definitely have to shoot. They can actually sell, if not in that moment, they might sell for things like books and magazines and historic articles a little bit further down the line. As far as me and Tranmere were concerned, there were a couple more games before the last game of the season. One was a 2-0 home win, the other a draw away from home. Nothing really special about either to report back from a photography perspective. And so we move on to the last game of the season, which was back at home at Prenton Park. Now, this was a game with quite a lot going on, actually, considering for Tranmere on the pitch, it didn't mean that much, because there were some other storylines to be aware of that I needed to make sure I was across as a photographer on that day. Number one was Tranmere had actually confirmed a new manager in the days leading up to the game, and he would be in charge still for this game. I say still because he'd been caretaker manager and assistant manager before then. He'd appointed an assistant manager who was also a coach at the club and used to play for the club, as well as appoint a new first team coach from external, who's an ex-Premier League player. And so it was important at this last game that I used that as an opportunity to get lots of photos of these 3 guys because they are going to be well used by the club through the summer and into the build-up for next season. And it's nice to have a little bit of stock of them in position before the new season. You might be saying that surely I had some of the manager already if he'd been caretaker manager and in the dugout. And that's correct. But actually what happened on the final day of the season, because he'd taken that step from being assistant manager and caretaker manager, and he's now officially manager, rather than putting a club tracksuit on, he'd gone a bit more smart casual and dressed a bit more like a manager, kind of Mikel Arteta style, if you like. And so actually the photos did have some extra meaning because it was quite obvious he was now in the position of manager if you'd put that photo side by side with some of the earlier pictures I'd taken of him. The other big news story as far as Tranmere is concerned that I wanted to make sure I did capture, where the manager was quite a low profile appointment. They did also appoint a technical director in the days preceding or leading up to that final game of the season. He was a bit more high profile. He's an ex-Premier League manager and as well as managed quite a few big clubs in the Championship. And so I knew he was going to be in a director's box in the main stand at this final game. So I also wanted to make sure I had some shots of him. So leading up to the game, this first few minutes was all about me capturing images of the manager, the assistant manager, the first team coach and the technical director in the stand. Once the game kicked off, it was kind of normal routine for me. I always sit, certainly at home games as well. The end Tranmere are attacking, or by and large, sometimes I will move around, but not often. And so that meant in the first half that I was basically had the Northampton fans, there was about 2,500 of them, sat behind me. Now the reason there's so many of those, and that's the other angle of this game, is that if Northampton either bettered the result of Stockport County or if they just won the game, then they would be promoted automatically that day. So that's another massive angle to this game. Before the match, I'd agreed to file some images with an agency, not only of the new Tranmere management staff, because that might be used by a national if there's a big pre-season friendly or something in the summer, or maybe an early League Cup tie next season, but also because of the element of Northampton. If they get promoted, there's going to be massive celebrations, probably on the pitch. So first half, as I said, I was sat at the end of the Northampton fans, Tranmere shooting towards me, Northampton shooting away to the far end. And after what I think was about 5 or 6 minutes, Northampton took the lead with an absolute world-class volley and a brilliant goal that sent the Northampton fans behind me into sheer pandemonium, as well as the dugout and the players. And what happened in the aftermath of that is the player who scored turned and ran towards his own fans and management team to celebrate. And so I had my 400mm lens on, one of my bodies, and that gave me a perfect opportunity to get some nice celebration photos. Now, as it happened, there was no other goals in the game. And so that game was like the promotion clinching goal, and I got some nice celebrations of that. So they were ones I definitely filed with an agency. And, you know, you're looking for those key moments in a game that make or break storylines. And so that was certainly one of them. The rest of the game, I won't say it was a non-event. Tranmere played pretty well, had a few chances, could have drawn the game at least, which would have been pretty good after the season they'd had to hold a promotion winning team. But news filtered through about 3 minutes before the end of the Tranmere Northampton game that the Stockport game had finished. And what that meant is Northampton could play out the final moments of the season knowing they were definitely promoted. And so as a photographer, you know a couple of things are imminently about to happen. Firstly, obviously Northampton are about to be promoted, so the players, the managers, the coaches and the fans are going to go absolutely balmy and celebrate, and that's going to give you some nice shots. Secondly, outside of the Premier League, it's happened in the Premier League as well a few times over the last year or so actually, but certainly promotions in the lower divisions in England, Championship, League One, League Two, automatic promotion is usually celebrated with a pitch invasion, rightly or wrongly, and so I knew this was definitely going to happen. I'd photographed this scenario at Tranmere twice before when the opposition team wins promotion and the fans invade the pitch. I'd had pitch invasions in Tranmere's favour twice or 3 times before as well, so I knew what was coming, and so there's quite a few things to consider. So firstly, I got some nice shots of fans just beginning to run on the pitch. That is because they thought it was full-time. It wasn't actually full-time quite yet. And so these photos are just before the whistle goes. They managed to shepherd those guys back off the pitch. The game restarts, and then a minute or so later, the full-time whistle goes. Cue pandemonium, and those big celebrations begin. Now, I know a couple of photographers, there might have been 3, I think, in total, that was sat at the Northampton end still at this point. For the second half, I'd obviously switched to the opposite end of the pitch where Tranmere were attacking. And so when you're in that scenario, when you've got a pitch invasion, you've got all your gear kind of in the middle of it, it's really worth considering in advance of games, or certainly getting towards the end of games when scenarios like this might arise, because you need to protect your gear. Now, sometimes you're just going to have to take a little bit of a risk if that's what you're willing and comfortable to do, if you want to get in amongst it and get the shots that you need that might sell. Use body harnesses and camera straps to attach as much as possible to you or around your neck. If you've got a laptop, try and put it maybe in a backpack on your bag with any spare gear if you can. But inevitably, there's always going to be gear you have to leave behind. It might be an empty case, it might be more than that. The 2 guys I know who left their gear in the middle of a pitch invasion had laptops among it. One was still out, I think. Normally, these pitch invasions are good-natured. You know, fans aren't there to steal gear. They're not there to damage anything. They're there to celebrate what is a historic moment for those guys. The team has just been promoted. And thankfully, none of the photographers' gear was touched this day. So to the shots themselves, you've got a couple of things you can do. You can either get in amongst it and get those nice close-up shots of the fans hugging players and all that kind of jubilation. I knew there's a couple of guys already in amongst it, so what I did is I packed most of my gear up safely, went a few rows up into the main stand and shot down over the pitch as everyone kind of converged towards the tunnels and dugout area as players were making it off the pitch. That gave me a couple of nice shots. They're a bit alternative to what I knew was going to be filed at other agencies from the guys who were on the pitch already. Now, something else to mention here is smoke bombs and pyrotechnics. Now, they are banned from UK stadia. You're not allowed to take them in, but inevitably, several times a season, they do find their way in. And when you have a promotion celebration, you will almost certainly come across fans with smoke bombs and pyrotechnics and other things. And while they are dangerous and you definitely need to be careful of them and wary of them, they can make for some great photos as backdrops or kind of add some atmosphere into those shots. Now, because of the amount of fans on the pitch, the police and stewards and safety officer at Tranmere, whoever took the decision, their decision was that the Northampton team would not be allowed back out on the pitch to celebrate once they managed to get off, and so they wouldn't be able to celebrate with the trophy, which is a bit of a shame for the fans and also obviously the photographers. We stuck around on the off chance any players or staff did sneak through past the safety guys and the police to get out onto the pitch, and they did. The manager did come out and a couple of his backroom staff, and so there were some bit average but nice photos to capture when they did come back out. And so that's it. Hope you found this little wrap up of the season, or the last weeks of the season, fairly helpful. For me now, the season is over as far as football is concerned, so on that front I will probably spend the summer cleaning my gear, looking for new archiving options, looking for new photo storage options, seeing if anything better exists out there, and also considering whether I'm in a position to justify upgrading any of my gear going into the new season. I'm shooting this video in the first week of June. Obviously, July is when players will normally return to pre-season training. I think the first pre-season games I'll be covering around the 5th or 6th of July, so not that far away actually at all. It seems that the summer gets shorter every year, or the close season gets shorter every year here in England. Between now and then, I will post a couple of other videos up around photography content, so don't miss those. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great summer, and thank you for watching. I'd love to see you on my next video.